we continue to look for other certification opportunities. And just to highlight, I wanted to share an example that I experienced, and I put my former reg services hat on in terms of how we can do things differently, and something that I hope we continue to look at. We have, as you know, nuisance abatement responsibilities in the city, and we do mowing in a variety of properties across the city. And so that contract, the way we usually do contracting is that we send out one singular RFP, send that out into the community. My first year here, we got one single vendor who wanted to do that. And they could never keep up. I had more calls on grass cutting that summer than I ever expected to have once having accepted this job. My second summer, I was determined that would not happen, and yet we still send out an RFP because that's what we do in the city. And we got two vendors to do it. Well, lo and behold, similar things happen. There's no way for that singular vendor to, even though we divided it in the city, to keep up with the volume that we were doing. So after several conversations with procurement, we were able to send out an informal bid that we limited to certain neighborhoods. And when we did that, we actually got, and I don't recall if it was 8 or 9, but we got a substantial increase in participation from that vendor. And it sparked an idea that, A, not only can we do our contracts differently, but B, an idea that is currently, we have folks in the city coordinator's office working with CPED. To me, it sparked a really great entrepreneurial opportunity. We have this demand. If we create an opportunity for them to work with CPED, this is perhaps a business opportunity for people in neighborhoods and communities. The cost of entering the market is really equipment, and it's low-costing equipment relatively, lawnmowers and such. And if we can figure out how to match demand in communities and match that with the work that we do, then we've changed the way in which we've done business, and we've also perhaps created some entrepreneurial opportunities in specific neighborhoods that were not otherwise there. So taking a look as we continue on a whole variety of efforts, I think, will be critical to our success moving forward.
So I did recall my last point that I wanted to make. So thanks for filling in there and letting me collect my thoughts again. But I'll start this way. When I first got here, it seemed like every time we went out for a contract or to buy anything, we cared about two things. One was the quality, would it serve our purpose, and then the cost. And we looked at the lowest cost that would meet our quality. We did create, I think in 2008, something we called an environmentally preferable purchasing policy, which I think gave permission to staff and others and to ourselves, and maybe set a policy so we legally could sometimes pay more if we were getting something that matched that policy, that it was more environmentally friendly. And since then, I've been trying to develop a policy that was more of a socially responsible purchasing policy that would include issues about the environment, but also look at the workforce and how they're treated. And we do also have a living wage ordinance, and we also have a requirement about honoring domestic partnerships and those kinds of, which maybe is outdated at this point. But so that's something I've been working on and looking at opening up, and it has to do with even food purchasing and other things that aren't related to this, but it also is related to this. So I just want us not to be spinning off without communicating or connecting these pieces, because if we do change our purchasing policy to be more socially responsible, it could certainly include issues about what are we doing to help address equity gaps and those things. So let's keep in contact and see if maybe they can't coordinate.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilmember Gordon just answered one of my questions, which was about the incorporation of some of our workplace policies into our contracting process. And so I'm glad to hear, Councilmember Gordon, that you're working on that. I'm very supportive. I think this is such important work, and I appreciate the level of detail you've given us as we kind of familiarize ourselves. So I may have some kind of basic questions, but I wanted to confirm that we do not currently have policies that prioritize local businesses in our contracting. Is that right?
So, and perhaps other people can, because I want to say that I'm sorry, Chair Glidden, Councilmember Bender, forget the formalities of our requirements sometimes, so I apologize. I believe that we have something in our policies, and procurement can, or Sandy can help me if I'm wrong, that talks about local preferences, but at the same time, we've got a low bid requirement. And so part of the work that we're going to be doing here, and it's in the work plan, and it came up in that kind of best practices group that we've been talking about with Met Council and with St. Paul, is to think about best value contracting practices. And that may also attend to some of the topics that you were talking about in terms of the range of considerations. I don't know if I look back, if I'm mistaken about the local policy preference.
Okay, I appreciate very much that is part of the work. I have been hearing from my local businesses who I'm talking with a lot about ways that the city can really improve both every interaction that we have with our small businesses, as well as just, putting our money where our mouth is in terms of supporting our small businesses directly by investing in them through our contracting. So I think that's a really important piece of this work. I also observed that we don't have requirements for our smaller contracts where, and I guess I did know this, but now that we're seeing it in this context, it's interesting to think about that dynamic. Certainly having more stringent requirements for larger contracts makes sense, but on the other hand, as you've pointed out, some of the smaller contracts may be more feasible for smaller, locally owned, newer businesses to be competitive with. And so I also appreciate sort of seeing that laid out here and having that as part of this process as well, thinking about ways where we might be able to encourage or maybe even require more stringent requirements on some of these smaller contracts if that seems to be feasible. So those are just really comments that I had and wanted to clarify that piece about the local businesses.
Thank you. So I had a couple of things here. They're all sort of with this enterprise theme, sort of questions and comments. So one is on the data piece that you talked about, that we're going to get a better articulation of essentially the spend. And I appreciate Councilmember Gordon referring to this chart that was created in several years ago, I think 2011, 2012. I think one of the challenges, I'm not saying that chart wasn't accurate in just sort of its dynamic of what's the spend, but one of the challenges was we knew we weren't collecting good information, and sometimes we didn't have the best way to identify who beyond what should we be counting beyond who is a certified business. And so I think those are some of the questions that we're asking this team to help wade through and answer so that we can have a set of data. My question on the data is beyond just gathering it so we can look at it, and what's the plan for having an ongoing data piece so that we're not continuing to look for a special resource to understand what's going on in our departments in our city?
Chair Glenn, thanks for asking that question, because I think that's critical and why I really point to the modules that we have. If we constantly just looked externally, and there are companies, and we may use some in this particular instance to help data scrub is really what the term of art that I've heard most often, to think about this data, then we'd be constantly in this mode of having to contract somebody out for it. We have some technology now that will really enable us to better identify that for our own purposes. But part of that comes that initial baseline work of figuring out where that is and scrubbing that immediately, but putting into place some, and again, it goes back to training, not just finance and property services, but it's really our department partners to make sure that the code that they enter, that the identification, and that's where pulling the queries is so important, goes in correctly, so that then we can just periodically continue to query this and test it.
So just so I can understand, so we would have the capacity ourselves, if we train our departments properly on how to code materials, to do the ongoing data piece.
Chair Glenn, that is the expectation, yes.
Okay, all right, that's just to kind of get to that. I did want to say that I appreciate that this plan seems to have some real specifics and areas that we've talked about for quite some time. So I'm going to just call out the work on the certification process. And I'll just say with that, I hope that we don't wait for some kind of global solution to look at how we can improve what we're doing in the city of Minneapolis. So I'll just kind of put that out there as my perspective, one person, but I have folks have been working on this sort of what's a bigger global solution for the region or whatever it is for some time. Maybe they're closer than I think to finding what's the way to do that, but I think there are some improvements we could maybe make for the city in the interim that doesn't have us just utilizing the most difficult certification process for all the contracts beyond construction. So I would just put that out there as my perspective. The other thing that was kind of a more specific programmatic initiative is this target market. And for my colleagues, as a heads up, Councilmember Quincy and I are doing an ordinance introduction on that this Friday. I will just say this actually was a recommendation from the 2010 disparity study. So this is something that in some ways has been in the public recommendation, range of opportunities that the city could take advantage of for some time. So I look forward to working with staff and understanding what might be the best way to craft that kind of policy opportunity. So kind of getting back to this enterprise issue, I had a couple questions just about the ongoing responsibility for the work and how you're looking at certain initiatives. As an example, we had this very successful business opportunity fair that happened last year. This was, as I understand it, a CPED initiative, which is great. They do a lot of that business outreach. But my question would be, and this is just an example type of thing, but how do we take something like that and ensure that it is not just a department initiative for something as important as this, but a city initiative, and that we have some regularity to how this opportunity happens? So again, I think CPED did a great job. I know they put a lot of effort into this, and there was a lot of partnership across the enterprise, but it wasn't really a city enterprise initiative. It was a department-led initiative. So how do you see something like that continuing into the future, knowing it's important to this work of the enterprise, and that often for vendors establishing a relationship with the many departments that may contract with them is important?
So, Chair Glidden, I'll say that one of the reasons that I came to the city coordinator's office was that I shared Spencer's vision of really thinking about the work that we do as an enterprise level. I, perhaps having come into this the city new, and not having had previous experience with the city, it seemed to me that there were just a lot of silos, and it's not something that we haven't heard of before. Some really great collaborations going, some really great individual department initiatives going, but to me, at the beginning of my work here in the city, it just seemed that we're losing opportunities by not having a much more enterprise, citywide focused approach. And it's one of the attractive things that brought me to the city coordinator's office. As we continue with this work, and we've been meeting as a collective team, and at the back of the presentation, you'll see the initial team members, our supplier diversity team, and that will continue to be expanded as we go along. But at least we've got a core group that will continue to meet together. We've been meeting every other week approximately to continue these efforts. That will continue moving forward. So we will continue to work on this as a team and bring in those member partners as we move forward. And part of that effort, and I believe I speak for the supplier diversity team as a whole, is that thought of everyone wanting to think about this as the city's work, that it is not just something that resides solely in CPED, that is not, contract compliance is not something that just resides in the Civil Rights Department, that the job of increasing our certifications, or the job of increasing how small businesses come into the city, is really a collective effort. It's why I make mention of things like ELMS, or our Business Made Simple process. And again, those are touch points at which the city coordinator's office in particular is attached to as we continue to move this forward. So our aim as a collective, as we continue to come out with recommendations, is to make sure that those individual efforts, while the business fair may have been driven by CPED, that we take efforts to think about how are we going to do this citywide and change how we do that moving forward so that it's a City of Minneapolis business opportunity fair that has potential for a variety of departments to showcase. I say that, however, and I want to give due credit to CPED because even though they drove this, I must say that they invited participation from a variety of different departments, from contract compliance to Public Works, who's one of the largest contractors within the city. So they did reach out and create it, and our job is really to institutionalize this so that it's not just dependent on if we've got some really good drivers in a particular department. So we'll be thinking about how do we make that into the fabric of what we do moving forward.
Well, I do want to say I feel like the coordinator's office's participation in these efforts has been really important to moving the work forward to establishing a more concrete work plan. I feel hopeful looking at this work plan. I really do. I really do. But I do want to say I feel like this word collaboration, at least to me, does not go far enough. So I just kind of want to put that out there, and I think we need to have continued conversation with policymakers and with staff about how do we articulate what our expectations, enterprise-wide expectations, as opposed to invitations to participate, okay? So in establishing these goals and approving a work plan, I understand that these are expectations for the enterprise. And that we're working on how do we fulfill those expectations, knowing that we have talent that may have different approaches, and we're kind of trying to work through that. But I think by nature we have a bit of a diffuse system, and that serves us well in many ways, but sometimes it does also present some challenges. And so, again, I want to say thank you for stepping in, and thank you to the work team for giving all of your efforts to creating a good plan. And I think we need to continue the conversation, though, about how the plan is able to be implemented, not just on an invitation, but as an expectation for the enterprise. So with that, I'm not seeing any further discussion. So I will move to approve this item. Any last comment or discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is approved. Thank you very much. With that, we turn to reports of committees, and the first is Community Development and Regulatory Services with Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. There are 15 items that we are bringing forward on Friday. Items 1, 2, and 3 are land sales. Item 4 are a few minor changes to our mobile food vendor regulations. This has to do with farmers markets and does not affect food trucks in neighborhoods outside of farmers markets and does not affect downtown. Item number 5 are are the regular license and consumer services agenda. Item number 6, 7, and 8 are all license conditions on massage and bodywork establishments. Item number 9 is a rental license condition, as is item 10. Item 11 is a contract with the county for their MFIP program. Item 12 is a property acquisition that needs our approval for Hennepin County Medical Center. Item 13 is accepting grants, as is item 14. And item 15 is authorizing some amendments to the Downtown East Commons construction pay-as-you-go process that we put in place. With that, I'll happily answer questions on items 1 through 15.
I'm not seeing questions. So next we have Health, Environment, and Community Engagement with Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. The Health, Environment, and Community Engagement Committee is bringing forward 6 items for approval. I don't think there's anything that should bring up much controversy or discussion. The first is approving an appointment to the Public Health Advisory Committee. The second is authorizing issuance of our request for proposals for the One Minneapolis Fund. This is the same RFP we put out last year. The third item is authorizing a contract with the Minnesota Department of Health for funds to support maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting. The next item is authorizing a contract with Hennepin County and State Health Improvement Program funding to work on disproportionate use of menthol tobacco. The fifth item is authorizing a lease agreement with the public schools to use space in multiple school sites to provide services to the general public in the event of a public health emergency. And the final item is authorizing a contract with Omeda and increasing the amount by $150 to provide some more diabetes education services. And I can take questions on any of those items.
All right, I'm not seeing questions. Public safety, civil rights, and emergency management with Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. On Friday, we will have one item, and that item is just a bomb detection services contract amendment with the U of M for a 2015 Vikings football game.
All right. We have Councilmember Wright with Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The committee will be forwarding 9 items for full council consideration. Item 1 is the 38th Street East Reconstruction Project. Item 2 is our 2016 paving program report. Item 3 is the contract amendment with the University of Minnesota for water distribution system research. Item 4 is the car sharing program. We received a report from staff regarding that. Item 5 is the Xerxes Avenue South Alley construction project designation and public hearing. Item 6 is the quarterly submittal of traffic zones, restrictions and controls, fourth quarter 2015. Item 7 is the bid for Hennepin-Lyndale Avenue reconstruction. Item 8 is the bid for small diameter sanitary sewer cleaning, and that's acceptance of low bid. Item 9 is the car sharing program policy, and we received and filed that policy. Stand for questions, Madam Vice President.
All right, thank you. Next, Councilmember Quincy with the Ways and Means report.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Ways and Means will bring forward 10 items for consideration on Friday. The first is a legal settlement with the City of Minneapolis versus Ryan Companies. Second is a grant contracts and appropriation of funds received from the Byrne Criminal Justice Innovation Program grant. We have the donation of billboard display from Clear Channel Outdoor. We also have a contract for the Creative City Creative City Challenge Art Competition Project. The fourth quarter of 2015 gift acceptance resolution accepts those donations. We have a contract with Perceptive for employee engagement survey and related services. There's an IT gift acceptance for a March 2016 conference expenditure, contract amendment with IBM for the IOP platform software, and a contract amendment with Verint Americas for the 311 login system support. And the final item is the application for U.S. Department of Transportation's Smart City Challenge, approving an application submittal. Happy to answer any questions on those items.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Quincy. And finally, we have Zoning and Planning with Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 4 items from Zoning and Planning. The first is granting an appeal related to a side yard setback variance for Mount Olivet, new development there at 5517 Lyndale Avenue South. The second is reappointing 3 excellent members of our Zoning Board of Adjustment. We're very grateful for their service. Item number 3 is denying a rezoning at 1844 Central Avenue Northeast. And item number 4 is an alley vacation for 4801 France Avenue South.
All right. With that, I believe we are concluded with our agenda. I was trying to look down here and I can't, left my cheaters at home. So I believe we are adjourned. Thank you.